Hello, and welcome to Nomadic Diaries, the re-entry series. I'm Doreen Cumberford, the host.
And I'm Linda Mueller, the co-host.
Hi, everyone. Doreen here from Nomadic Diaries and Repatriation Diaries. I am about to read Bridges and Anchors, which is a chapter in the Arriving Well book. And this is written by Michael Pollock. The highlands of Kenya, the land of red clay, fragrant jacarandas, and acres of tea, were my childhood home from aged 8 to 12. It was along the escarpment of the Rift Valley that I became a third culture kid. TCK. Born on Long Island in New York, I moved with my family of 6, first to New Jersey, then to Vermont, then on to Kenya, then back to Vermont, another new town. And my parents moved again as I entered college. 11 different houses, 6 schools. My first significant time away from home was 3 months in South Africa at age 14. At 22 years old, I married my college sweetheart, Kristen, who was born in Sierra Leone and grew up in North Carolina and Iowa, mostly Iowa. During college, we'd each spent a semester overseas, she in France and I in Kenya. Those are the bare facts. Those who've traveled those miles and moved those moves know some of what's buried behind those facts. The losses, the grief, the life gifts, the celebrations, the stories. So many stories. So when Kristen and I came to our life together and our decision in 2003 to live and work in China for 2 years, which turned into 9 years, we had already laid some groundwork. We didn't think we were rookies. And that was the most dangerous assumption, that we didn't have a great deal to learn. Fast forward to 2012, winter, our final year in China. With everyone in our company working through their plans and announcing their decisions to stay or go. It was a time every year fraught with weighing, consulting, considering, praying, and trying to peer into the future to see which was best for each person and each family. Once our decision to go had been made, there were more decisions to make. Whom to share the news with, and when, and how. It was a relational minefield. And it didn't matter that we had been through the process with friends 8 times already. At times we danced the leaving waltz with some grace, but we also misstepped even on others' toes. The complexity of unraveling our lives from the community in Tianjin, my foreign and domestic colleagues in 6 other cities, and the Chinese communities with whom we lived and worked was staggering. I remember dinners with close friends at a Korean barbecue, our feet tucked up on the heated floor, rolling bulgogi meat into fragrant leaves while reminiscing over how we'd met and the adventures we'd had together. That winter, we also flew 3,000 kilometers and then drove 5 hours into the mountains to spend time with villagers in Yunnan province who had become dear friends. It wasn't just the scope of the geography, but how intertwined our communities had become, and that made the process more challenging. My core work team had become very dear friends, with whom we also shared worldview and faith. We played football together, wrote curriculum, worshipped, prayed together, traveled, delivered services to various schools, went on vacations with each other's families to the seaside town of Bieidai. Hey, we shared our hopes and dreams and our challenges. We had to figure out how to deliver the news that all these things were ending. We were going to transition to a new life. How does one acknowledge all these ties, affirm these connections, and yet at the same time look forward to the realities of life 12,000 miles away on the other side of the planet? It was painfully affirming to look at all the close ties one has made as they are being severed. We did not have the word. I was tai nanguo, too miserable. Each community and relationship had its own characteristics and culture to address. That spring, I returned to the Yunnan communities without my wife, leading a group of high school students and staff. The village of Haba is nestled into the side of Haba Snow Mountain, and our host, ethnically Zhuang, though most were Muslim, known as Hui, raise yaks, horses, and donkeys. Chickens, hemp, walnuts, corn, barley, apricots, peaches, and the unusual Sichuan peppercorns known as numbing peppers. The extended family gathered in the dining area of a beautiful wood and stone lodge. We had eaten a delicious meal and were now in comfortable chairs drinking hua cha, or flower tea, around a large iron wood-burning stove used for cooking and heating, which is much appreciated in June at 8,000 feet above sea level. Word had spread that this was my last year to lead this trip and to visit these hospitable friends. Over the 6 years that I had known the family, we had worked, learned, and laughed, celebrated, and adventured together. They taught me how to milk a yak and churn butter. I'd convinced them that stream climbing the steep, icy, cold waters was actually fun for foreigners. Our team had constructed a road made of stone to Lao Ye's, Grandpa's, specifications and helped build a kindergarten building. We had planted corn together, helped winnow barley, and played intense high-altitude basketball with the local men. They'd invited us to evening celebrations, where we traded stories and learned to dance in Hui style. Sitting in the now crowded room of over 25 people, the air tinged with Lao Yi's cigarette smoke. They asked why I was not coming back. I explained that my work was ending and we would now have 2 children in university in the U.S. After talking quietly among themselves in Shuang, they made an offer in Mandarin. Too complex for me, my assistant translated. They want you to come here. They're saying that they have some land and they can build you a house. Then with tears in her eyes, oh, I think they really love you and don't want you to leave. The room was quiet and there were many eyes on me. I blinked back the unexpected moisture in my own, swallowed the lump in my throat, and tried again. My mother is a widow, as my father passed away in 2004. She is getting older now, almost 75. I need to be closer to her. She visited us in Tianjin and really loves China, but she is too old to come and live here. So I need to move back to Meigua, the beautiful land where she lives. As this was translated, the room suddenly became animated. There were heads nodding and gnarled farmers, hands waving, almost like a benediction. Suddenly, I was not abandoning our friendship, but doing exactly what they would do in my place, being a dutiful and responsible son. Will you come back? Several in the family asked. All I could say truthfully was, Wo bu zi, dao din shi, wo ki wang. I don't know, but I earnestly hope so. These moments, seemingly hundreds of them, with scores of faces, sights, smells, and tastes, were some of the invisible luggage that we packed up with us when we left our apartment and turned in the keys. How is your rafting? Friends asked us. Raft is the model my father David had created in the 1980s for healthy transitioning, standing for reconciliation, affirmation, farewells, and think destination. It had become a standard tool for thousands of expats to cope with transition. We said we thought we were doing great. We had planned out the steps, reconciled relationships that needed it, affirmed friendships and contributions to our lives. We said our farewells bravely and thought through our next steps. We were ready. But It turns out that we were not. With one flight over the Arctic Circle, 3 movies, and a second-rate tray of chicken and rice, our world flipped, and everything not tied down went spinning into the ether. The first shocks were not unexpected, but jolting nonetheless. We were no longer affluent. Settling down in the outskirts of Baltimore, Maryland, 20 miles from the top 3 wealthiest counties in the U.S., we realized we were on the upper reaches of poverty, and that this community that had been home for 12 years BC, before China, was not one we could afford to rejoin. The second shock was the realization that even though we had visited friends and family at least once a year over the last 9 years, people had moved on. Lives had changed, some of them drastically, such as that of the friend who lost his wife to cancer, or of the family from our old school who lost a son, our son's age, to suicide. Thomas Wolfe's words, "You can never go home again," hit us with a ringing slap. We were no longer from Baltimore, yet how could we deny the relationships, the familiar sights, the sounds, and the culture? My wife reveled in the fact she could navigate around the city without referring to a smartphone, or more likely, in her case, a map. Want us to pick up some groceries at Trader Joe's off Towson Circle? No problem. Want to meet up at Sherwood Gardens for a picnic among the tulips? We'll be there in 20 minutes. There's a festival at Cromwell Valley Park after Sunday services at Faith Christian Fellowship. Sure. We'll take the Alameda to Loch Raven. We could grab bagels at Greg's, or crab soup at Belvedere Square. We'd smile when the waitresses at Towson Diner called us hun, and we got peripherally excited when the Baltimore Ravens began driving towards what would be a Super Bowl victory. But it wasn't home anymore. Rather than feeling like a part of what was going on, I felt more like a really well-informed spectator. Worse, when people asked what I would be doing next, it was complicated to explain to someone without a background in cross-cultural living and adjustment. When I explained at a reunion gathering between delicious bites of Maryland's Silver Queen sweet corn that I was working with TCKs, I quickly added, "Third culture kids, you know, children who've grown up across cultures." After a somewhat blank, response, I added that they were like our own 3 kids and the children of missionaries or overseas military families, kids of State Department staffers, international business people, you know, NGOs. As the person's eyes got that slightly glassy look, warning lights and bells went off in my head. Even as a small voice somewhere in the back of my brain suggested sarcastically, reminding the person that we had been working with this population for the past 9 years. "Hello, where have you been?" it said, and again the warning lights with a new message. Pull out, you are on a crash trajectory." Changing course, I decided to explain that my clients were young adults with diverse and rich experiences and some steep challenges, who simply need informed care, strategic encouragement, and re-equipping. Good, I thought. This is a business-oriented group. Getting the word strategic in there will save the day. And indeed, I could see the person re-engaging and preparing an answer. Encounter, save. Well, we have lots of those kids who are struggling and could use that kind of guidance. Did you know that Mark Smith and Jim and Sarah's boy, what's his name? Jack, yeah. They've really gone off the rails and are causing their parents all kinds of pain. You should talk to them. This was my turn to mumble something agreeable and wander off in search of more iced tea. Disconnected or rewired. That's how the process felt. A bit like when I accidentally plugged my 120-volt printer into my 220-volt Chinese wall socket with the wrong adapter. There were a number of interactions in that first year that plugged in only to end with a quick burst of sparking emotions, silence, and the smell of something burning. The gifts of that year-long sojourn, besides the comfort of things once familiar, were the relationships that transcended the gaps. These people who were deeply connected to us through blood, time, depth of shared experiences, values, and deep heart issues. Some of the anchor relationships held all of these things. These were people who would go the distance with us and become a relational, and barring a relational catastrophe, remain our people. Two of these were my wife's older sister and her husband, a doctor and researcher at Johns Hopkins and part of an urban renewal community such as Sandtown. Deeply and broadly connected to the community, they shared many of our values. Our children had grown up as fast friends. They'd lived abroad as well. Besides Suzanne's childhood in West Africa, their family had spent a year in Kampala, Uganda. There were and remain anchor relationships. No matter what issues and circumstances we navigate, we will remain bonded to each other. This past Thanksgiving, they opened their home to our growing family. 20 of us gathered to celebrate our heritage and connectedness. Although Suze and Dave did not share our China or even our East Asian experience, they connected us to part of our identity and assured us that as odd as we felt at times, we belonged. Marianne was and remains another gift. As neighbors and fellow worshippers at our church home in the city, our two oldest children and her two have grown up together. We've been part of a small group fellowship, celebrated birthdays, New Year's, 4th of July, marathon completions, and piano recitals together. Our children had laughed together and played Legos together and remained friends even though they attended different schools. What cinched the deal was that they had visited us in China. We'd eaten hot pot, jiaoza, da bing, jidan, and a spicy, scrumptious Uyghur dish of chicken and peppers. We had fondly named chainsaw chicken. At the base of Tianjin's tall tower, they joined us in a local game of ice sliding, in which you pull yourself around at speed with two spiked clubs. Nathan had even joined into the TCK game of ice polo, where goals and a wicker ball were added to the mix, and he had the scars to prove it. They knew our life in Tianjin. They could relate to our stories. Marianne, Lisa, and Nathan were living proof that we were not making it all up. We had really lived in China. Being with them affirmed our identity and belonging both here and there. And those are what I call bridging relationships. A whole year after we returned to the US, still in the grip of liminal space, that place beyond solid platforms where one hangs in space, hoping that a trapeze bar will appear in one's hands, that the grip will be true, and that another platform, solid and dependable, will be waiting on the other side, we headed for Michigan. On the way, we stopped to help my mom close down the house she'd lived in for the past 23 years and resettle in a new home. That shook me a bit. Saying goodbye once again to something familiar, the house, the lilies in the yard, the blueberries, the visiting deer and raccoon who made nightly raids. And yet the very fact that we were there helping her sort through hundreds of books, each seemingly with its own story, and touching the artifacts of my youth and our family history, reaffirmed a set of roots that, although mobile, could still nourish. Resettling in Michigan was not the smooth process we had anticipated and planned for. Our for sure house was delayed a month. Our oldest children had to return to college before we settled in. And the moving company called to tell us that although it had never happened before, they had lost our pods. Basically, the bulk of our earthly goods and all of our treasured memories from China. Faced with yet another loss, we consoled each other in our key anchors, our faith, our love for each other, our friendships scattered across the continent, our strong memories, and our determination to weather whatever came. The company found our pods. Our older children settled into college. We moved in and registered our youngest for school. Exploring the local dunes and waves of Lake Michigan, we appreciated the sun sparkling on the water, the clean air, the fluffy clouds, and the gorgeous sunsets. We breathed in and then out. Eventually, we began to find bridging relationships here, people who could connect with some of the aspects of our experience and us with them, such as the former missionaries to the Gambia and one to the Philippines, the repats who had been in the State Department, families that had also adopted children from China, TCKs from local colleges, folks who worked with immigrants, families who had highly mobile backgrounds, and those who liked to explore other cultures, foods, and languages. There were more connections than we expected, and yet, why not? We are all human beings after all. And in time, several people have asked, "So what's your story?" And the process of being at home has begun among this new community of Americans. I expect that in time, we may prove to be each other's anchors. I would just like to say thank you to Michael Pollock, who is an adult TCK educator and author. He's a cultural transition coach, an advocate, and a provider. He lived and worked in 5 countries, and he's still in the field helping with crossing cultures. He said he's still learning about repatriation and might just be ruined for monogeography. So if that rings a bell with you, I believe that you are in the right place right now. This was an excerpt from Our Arriving Well, is to be found on Amazon as an ebook. Our Arriving Well, Stories about Identity, Belonging, and Rediscovering Home After Living Abroad. Thank you so much for listening to this. And masalama, sayonara, and hasta luego.